What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. This is one of your promotional episodes. We're here today to talk about Home to Stay, the complete Ray Bradbury EC Stories. I've read it. It's a review. Go check out 20thcenturygeek.com for the written review. But today, I'm getting to talk with the fantastic Mr. Greg Bear, sci-fi author in his own right, but also has written an introduction to this great book. Greg, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing okay, yeah. You know, this is quite a fun thing for me because having known Ray for so many years, I'm just delighted to be able to write about him and talk about him.
No, it's good, and it's such a good collection as well. It
is.
It's a fantastic collection. I've as you might guess from the sort of the name of the podcast, 20th Century Geek. I'm much a fan of these sort of I'll say retro, but this is sort of like these early EC stories and all sorts of stuff. I think they're fantastic. So to have a complete collection of all of Ray Bradbury stories all in one place, and the supplementary material is one thing that I highlighted. This isn't just, we should say, this isn't just a collection of just like black and white comics or that. This has got a whole load of stuff to go with it. But yeah, so let's this is available from Fantagraphics. But Greg, you obviously wrote the introduction, but you also knew Ray from, you haven't got to give away a year, but quite a while ago.
1967.
1967.
And got him involved along with Sheldorf and others at San Diego Comic-Con, and he was there every single session for the next 30 years or more. And he was a delightful fellow, but also as kids, we would go to his lectures. Sitting in his lectures, and that's where he talked about all this stuff that he loved, not just the comic strips of Flash Gordon and that sort of thing. He also loved comic books and things and movies and TV, more movies than TV at that point, but he certainly was involved in TV later on. Ray's stories were amazing. He often talked about going to EC and basically saying, "Hey guys, you do lovely work, but you're taking some of my stories and you're messing with them. How about we form a little relationship here?" And that's how that all began. In fact, Al Feldstein and William Gaines really understood how much they could promote Ray's name in the comic books. Later on, of course, it became a political issue. And Ray had to kind of back down a little bit because the House Un-American Activities Committee, or whatever it was investigating EC, was pretty tense about this. And this was the Frederick Wortham years. And this was the end of EC. But the EC was in the Ray Bradbury stories, I think, and the artistry and the creation going on there was just amazing. And it's a beautiful book, all full color, which we haven't seen for quite a while. All these color plates and stuff of the EC panels, they're just amazing.
And that's the thing. I think the two things to pick up there is this idea of the imagination and artistry that went into these stories. There was a free, as you say, this is pre-Comics Code, this is pre-1954, and they had that freedom to really sort of explore things and not in a lurid way, because but there's some real, there's some intense.
Well, some of it was kind of lurid too.
Yeah,
they got really angry. Laying out your guts on a baseball diamond is but kids love these stories. They love the aspect. They love the science fiction aspect, the monsters, all that stuff. And Ray gently fitted into all of that. And his stories were done so respectfully and so beautifully, especially by Al Feldstein and Kamen and Jack Davis. That this collection is just finally it's here, and it's just astonishing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. The imagination, but again, we should say, we've saying it's this is EC, and EC obviously gets very sort of closely linked with the Crypt Keeper and the horror side of things, and those are definitely in here. I mean, there's some sort of there's some great ones, and some intense ones. I think it opens with the lake, which
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
It's a fantastic story. It's a real sort of an emotional gut punch as well. But this is also, the book's also got a lot of the Martian Chronicles stories, and so it becomes like an absolute sort of an anthology of science fiction stories as well, and the imagination involved in this. I mean, you can talk to this, but Ray Bradbury was very much, it seems, like a man of imagination, of ideas. Like, he never locked himself into one thing. It was just open to everything. Would that be the case? Sort of?
Yeah, Bradbury wasn't given credit for being the kind of scientific thinker that he actually was. Not often, anyway. He was considered kind of a humanist, human-loving writer of character and stuff like that. But Ray also invented virtual reality in one of his stories in The Veldt. If you think about it, those kids going to Africa, that's virtual reality. That's
of course. Yeah.
And to remember that, and to remember that he also involves so many scientific principles like wall screen TVs in Fahrenheit 451, and so many things that kind of became standard. He was definitely a thinker of some note in science fiction.
Yeah, well, let's say those are some ideas, and you mentioned The Veldt. That's a story I hadn't really thought about. But it's I read that quite a long time ago. But for you, like, you obviously knew him. You met in 1967, and sort of, as a young person, sort of like having that relationship with him. I'm assuming like he was almost like an inspiration then, and he was sort of, I'm assuming he was, and as you sort of say in your introduction, like he would encourage you to sort of be open to these things as well.
The things that Ray taught us as kids in his lectures and meeting him in person and so on was, do not give up on what you love. Don't let the people shame you out of anything you love. If you love it, keep loving it. And also, he basically laid down some of the tropes that became part of San Diego Comic-Con. And he was always a popular speaker there, hugely popular. And to bring one of the best speakers in the world to Comic-Con was quite an extraordinary thing. But we also had Jack Kirby and a lot of other people there. And so San Diego Comic-Con really got off to a great start with these personalities.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? It came out of a passion. I mean, it seems like, as many of these things do, these people sort of like they invent these things, they create the genre, but they're obviously clearly passionate about it as well. Much like yourself, you have a passion for the genre sort of that you exist as part of.
Absolutely. That passion, that David Clark, in a conversation with Jack Kirby, I don't know if he's recorded this or not, might be in the See You in San Diego book, but the things that they talked about, Jack Kirby says, all of these comic strips are just waiting to have movies made. There's a huge universe going on here that you can just exploit as films or TV. And David quite agreed. And then suddenly, 20 years later, it happened. Now we've got, comics, basically Marvel Comics, but also DC and so on, dominating all of this stuff. And this would have been astonishing to people in the 1950s.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. I often think about this, of sort of, the opportunities of seeing, some of these people, the young people may not have seen things like Jack Kirby, but to see things, their creations on screen. I mean, Ray did get to see some of his things, as the films were made, and you said he was involved in TV.
He had quite a few of them, yeah. There was, first was Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was Ray Harryhausen. So I partnered with Ray Harryhausen on that one, and they were old friends. Ray Bradbury had been, Ray Harryhausen been best man at Ray Bradbury's wedding.
Oh, wow.
They were good friends, and I had my daughter and I had the pleasure of interacting with them in person at the King Kong celebration and 65th anniversary of King Kong, but also at a convention in St. Louis, and just hearing their stories on a panel, asking questions about what these guys loved to hear about or read about in the 1930s and 40s when they first met, 1939. Was quite a privilege, because when they got together, they would kind of go into the banter that they would get into as teenagers. And this gave us insight into what they were like as teenagers. And so when they got together, one of the first things they said is they yelled out in unison, "Gustav von Seifertits," which people may not know this, but he was a well-known character actor in the 1930s, and he was as she. But they thought they loved his name. As can you imagine with a name like that, and how you can slip that into school conversation and not get in trouble. It was an amazing insight into what they were like as kids.
These young pioneers. So, and that's one of the things I think about, say about friends, is when you've got those those people in your life that do take you back to that younger. They make you feel young, and inspire. It's one of the things I feel. I'm too young. I'm getting old. I'm in middle age now, but I'm too young to have met these people. I often think, it's a real shame that these panels and these people, these titans of the genre and sort of sci-fi and geekdom, really, have talked on these panels, and half of them have never been recorded. It's a shame that this sort of thing's been lost, but must have been amazing to have seen them talk and to give.
Well, yeah, they did a lot of that at Comic-Con in San Diego, and when they got together, they had a ball, and so did the audience. The stories were very funny and very appropriate, just as Ray's stories were when he was talking alone. Ray Harryhausen didn't start coming out regularly to California until the 1980s or thereabouts, I think, after he retired. And we actually ran into him at Brian Aldiss's house in Oxford in 1983 or thereabouts. No, later. But, that was to actually encounter him. And so I had an embarrassing moment when I said, Ray, Mr. H, we as kids, we had this dance that we would do that would imitate your animation style. I says, "Oh, really?" He says, "Well, what was it? Can you do it for me?" And so I had to get up and dance. His characters moved. It was an astonishing, sort of elbows out and stepping back and forth of the beast from 20,000 Fathoms, or the Emer from 20 Million Miles to Earth. Just as kids, we absorbed these motions, and they were part of his choreography that was just astonishing for Harryhausen. For Bradbury, I read his stories starting around the age of 9 or 10, and just loved them. And later on, we were given the opportunity by Ballantine Books to buy some of the EC comics. I think nearly all the EC comics came out in 2 collections that were quite astonishing, with Rosetta covers, of all things. They were available for 50 cents or whatever, at your local drugstore. And boy, did we absorb those. And that was the beginning of our passion for the EC Comics version of Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you say it's sort of a slightly, because I've read, several of his books and some of his short stories and things like that, and they exist in a place, and there's a sort of, I always think like, I've got them up on my shelf actually, but Something Wicked This Way Comes, or sort of Fahrenheit, and there's a lyricism to the way he writes, and then you go into the comics, and as you say, sort of it's this, you can tell it's the same, but there's a different, he's changing the tone or in the approach to do it in the comic, and I think he knew his medium as well as the sort of the genre, which I think's a
well, I think he let the comic artists and the writers do this sort of thing, and they did a beautiful job. And they were good at EC of doing lovely adaptations or stealing of stories. And later on, talking with Ray, there was a time when a TV show came out, I think it was called Journey to the Unknown, which did a version of the story The Crowd that Bradbury had. And so I talked to Ray. I sent a note to him, and I says, "Hey, they stole this. This is, a screenwriter named Cordwainer Bird says it's his story." And he says, I'm not going to sue them. Hey, for one thing, they're in England, and that's a problem. But he says, I'm just not going to sue them. And the reason he said that was because in the 1950s, he had sued for The Sound of a Different Drummer, I think it was called, for a story that was kind of based on Fahrenheit 451. And on appeal, he won that. but it cost him a couple of years of effort and it really tore him out. And he did not want to do that again. And I think when he came to the EC Comics things, he says, you know, I think about suing them. Maybe it's important, but you know, I don't want to. And so I'm going to write to them, and I'm going to say, hey guys, these are lovely pieces of art, but they're borrowed from my stories, aren't they? And how would you like to work with me? And they said yes. And that was a moment that led to this book. And their collaboration was between Bill Gaines and Al Feldstein and all the other artists involved. It was quite sincere and really reflective of how much they loved their own work, but also Ray's stories. And some of the panels that Wally Wood did and so on are just astonishing pieces of artwork, certainly from the Cold War period. And you think of the panel, which is in the book, of course, of the shadows of all the children in There Will Come Soft Rain.
Yes.
Into the walls of the house, you know? And that's an image from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, actually, which we had shadow figures left behind after the atom bombs went off. And Ray was in there, and so were the artists. And it's an astonishing insight into what it was like being a kid back in those days.
Well, it's interesting that you say. I was just flicking through the images. Then it's sort of like the artistry, because that image actually, as you were saying, I just had it popped up on the screen, and I was like, yeah, the artistry and the inking. I mean, you know, artists and comic art has changed over the decades, but the thing to recognize is that, like, you know, this is one of those books where I'm just going to pick. There's a page. Almost every page is a page where I'm like, I'd like that as an art piece. I'd like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The original.
I don't
original
know
art.
if they ever sold those originals. I think Gaines may still have them all, but you know, they were amazing. And if they were up for sale now, they'd go for tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, there's a detailing, and it's, you know, the inking and stuff, like, you know, you said that, you know, obviously there's the ones in color, but even just in black and white, they're so effective. There's one here. Is it Let's Play Poison? Or was one of the stories? Yeah, Let's Play Poison was one that really affected. Like, you know, I read and I was like, yeah, this is a real impactful story. But some of the images in there, again, of, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's some quite there's kids involved, and one of them gets hurt and stuff, and it's sort of like the way it's depicted. You're like, yeah, this is really quite hard hitting, but it's beautifully illustrated, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, well, you know, think of the artists doing this work. Wally Wood, of course, was an amazing artist, not just for EC, but later on, everything, comic covers and all that sort of stuff. And then you think of I'm blanking on the TV Guide cartoonist, Jack Davis. You know, when you think of Jack Davis and the influence he had with his characters, which are a little funnier, but not necessarily in the Bradbury story. In the Bradbury story, the line is just, their art line is an amazing combination of different things, including, and I think some of the most famous EC comic artists, the horror artists were just, they were astonishingly impactful. All the kids who saw them and imitated them, and boy, did we imitate them. You know, we'd try to grab these things, just as we did later on with Mad Magazine and so on. We try to figure out, okay, how do you do that? You know, how can you grab something like that? But these stories are primo artistry in all of the cases.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. I mean, they're an absolute beauty to look at, and that's why I sort of, you know, you can just skim through them. I mean, there's a lot of dialogue, and that's one of the differences. I think, you know, just for anyone who is to do, just take on this book. And I recommend it, like, highly for, you know, if you're an EC fan, if you're a Ray Bradbury fan, if you're a science fiction or horror fan, it's totally worth your time. But there's definitely a sort of a slightly different skill to reading comics today as to what it was then, because, you know, there's large sort of there's more dialogue and stuff, but it's sort of it's the telling of the story is so brilliant. You won't notice it after the first couple of panels, I wouldn't have thought.
Well, you know, there were a lot more words in comics back in those days. And what they've done now is they've kind of focused on the imagery, which is great. But, you know, to convey some of these stories by Ray Bradbury or Neil Gaiman or so on, you kind of need more dialogue and more text than we have perhaps available to us. You know, when you think of Swamp Thing or that kind of stuff, there's a lot going on here that you kind of need to have explained to you. And the whole history of comics is this back and forth between the word and the image. You can't get along without either of them.
100%. Yeah.
In books, in Ray's case, you know, basically writers just sit around, and for the most part, they just write down words. And those words have to convey that imagery. And this was clear in Bradbury's stories. And what was astonishing about this is it worked so well to get these artists to collaborate with Ray on the word and picture combination.
And that's the thing, it is a collaboration. I mean, you know, look at these, I'm just going to pick another one, but there's that idea of the collaboration and the way they sort of use them. There's a panel, the first page of There Was an Old Woman, it's like, they know that there's a sort of a volume of text to be included, and you know, instead of having it as just a block of text, like it's included into the image, like it flows around things, and so like you know what you're going to read, but like it's a part of the storytelling, and so it's sort of
that was also part of the way the style ran in the comics. Those comics are so beloved today. Is they're just really interesting works of graphic art.
Yeah, then that's it. There's a skill, you know, that I think I wouldn't say it's lost, but like it's a different style today. But that's why the things I sort of admire about these is that artistry, and that's the graphic design, that sort of the illustration of it. That you know, they've got to encompass everything. Is wonderfully well done. But Greg, how did you? I mean, the one thing I wanted to ask is you know, you wrote the introduction to this book. And there's a lot of other
introduction. There's actually two other very scholarly introductions.
I was going to say, yeah, there's a lot of
history and really taught me some things I did not know. Apparently in 1970 at the first Comic-Con, Ray was saying, yeah, I seriously considered suing them. We didn't know that until the speech was kind of put up on the history pages. And he never did. And he didn't, I think, for those two reasons. A, because he kind of thought this is going to be an interesting thing to get involved in. These are creative people, but also he didn't want to take the time away from his work to sue somebody else again. And even though he won that first time, it was only on appeal. It was very arduous.
Yeah, a lot of effort.
You know, so I think that's why hearing Ray speak about this was so key to our youth, was because he was already acquiring a sort of wisdom about how to do things.
The master, he was sort of in the shadow of the master, learning the ways for the future. But how did you get involved in the book? I mean, you know, you were obviously, you know, you're the first sort of, you are the intro to the book, sort of is there. But like, how did you get involved? Was it sort of, did you bring it? They came to you.
I've been a fan of Fantagraphics for years and have been collecting many of their books. But they and they're up here in the Seattle area, and so we're local basically. And so Mr. Catrona just sent me a note saying, "How would you like to do an introduction to this?" It says, "Would I?" Would. You know, and so what he wanted the reminiscences of Ray's earlier years. He was in his 40s when I first met him, but that went on for 45 years between us, of my going to conventions, going to speeches, going to his house a number of times, having met him in St. Louis and other places in league with Ray Harryhausen, and really kind of getting. I'm a big fan of science fiction history. You know, to be a part of it is amazing to me, but to listen to it is fascinating. And we listened, as kids, we listened to Ray's stories with definitely wide open ears.
Yeah, no, like I say, taking it all in. No, it's wonderful.
I mean, after all, he could tell us stories about John Huston. Yeah. And there's a very funny story about John Huston, where Ray was working on Moby Dick's screenplay, comes into Huston's office in Ireland, and is starting to, you know, hand his pages over to Mr. Huston, and he says, Ray, I've got something to tell you. There's something going on at the studio. They don't believe we have enough female love interest in this story, so they want to have a main character who's female in Moby Dick. And I'm not replicating the exact wording, but at that point, Ray just kind of blew up. He had already been under pressure. And a screenplay was a very hard thing to do, especially with a director like Huston. And Ray blew up, and then he looked over at the corner and saw Huston behind his desk, and Huston was just cracking a big old smile. he'd been waving this postcard that the studio says we need woman in Moby Dick, and Ray realized that he was had. There was no post. Houston was just joking, and boy, that was quite a story to tell to us kids.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of them. It's wonderful to hear all these things, because it is that sort of going back, into sort of the golden age of these things, and a connection to, as you said, to be part of it. You are a part of that history as it sort of like it passes on. And it must have been wonderful to sort of to say, to sort of like, listen at the feet of Ray Bradbury, and this is where I hope that this, I hope that this book is fantastic. I think, you get to read the comics, you get to read the strips, but like you say, the supplementary material, your introduction, the other introductions, there's some reprinted things at the back, you got all the covers. Like this is such a fantastic package. I know
Fantagraphics did an amazing job on it, as good as they would. They have on so many books, and we've also got this history of See You at San Diego, which is by Mr. Klickstein, edited by him, and it's all the San Diego Comic-Con kids and the elders who came in and guided us, and it's their words, and it's got Ray Bradbury in there and pictures of Ray and all that sort of stuff, and it's also quite an interesting volume. But you put these two together in the same half-year period, and boy, what a combination of history here. It's just astonishing. But if you're a comics fan, this book is absolutely essential. You've got
100%.
It's some of the best reproductions we've ever seen of EC Comics.
Yes, it's clean, so clean. I mean, essential is the word. If you've got any love or any affection for these comics, this book is so worth your time, and everything that comes with it. I mean, like you say, it will look fantastic on your shelf, and it's one of those ones I think you'll take down on a regular basis. Just
also it's quite large, and the that you get of looking at the physical appearance of the book. It's quite beautiful. It's got a lot of intricate detail and impressings and all that sort of stuff. It's really a magnificent effort.
Yes, it really is, and it's worth every penny. It's going to look lovely on my shelf, is how I will say it. But I shall draw to a close there. But Greg, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
And it is, and again, there will be links down below in the notes to both Fantagraphics, and this will be out there. So go find it, go check it out. I've also done a review on 20th Century Geek website. There'll be a link down to that as well.
Cool.
But Greg, yes, thank you very much.
My pleasure. One of my favorite topics is being discussed here, so that's cool.
Yes, and I want everyone else to see it. This is why I'm doing this, because I'm a fan of Ray Bradbury, and to see these EC comics, and so to sort of get to talk to you and everything has been wonderful. And so I greatly appreciate your time and doing.
Okay, good seeing you.
Yes, but thank you very much. Appreciate it, and hopefully we might talk again in the future.
I'd love to. Okay, take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Another great 20th Century Geek episode. Thank you for listening. If you would like to get in contact to suggest topics for future shows, or just chat about everything nerdy, you can email me at 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. That's 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. Or find me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Just search for 20th Century Geek. If you would like to support the show, please go on your podcast catcher and leave a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. It raises the show in the ranks and lets more people know about the podcast. If you want to show more support for the podcast, we do have an Amazon wish list. Just go on Amazon and search for 20th Century Geek, and you will find a list of books that will help with research for future podcasts. And don't forget, we love second-hand books in 20th Century Towers. Once again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.